folks, Dr. Robert Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. Now this video is going to be on the health effects of coffee, and in particular what I wanted to do is I wanted to compare the antioxidant capacity of coffee to tea. Now the reason I want to do this is because generally in research and in the mainstream, tea takes all the plaudits. It's seen as a very healthy drink. There's a lot of research on tea. That research is passed on to the public, and I think the public have generally become aware that both black and green tea are healthy drinks. However, coffee has the potential to be just as healthy, and it actually has a very similar type of chemistry in terms of its antioxidant makeup. So I don't really want to get too much into the actual health effects, but I just wanted to compare the antioxidants that are found in tea with the antioxidants that are found in coffee to show that coffee is it has the potential to be a healthy drink. There is certainly research to show that there are similar effects to drinking coffee as there are to drinking tea. So for example, there is a protective effect on cardiovascular disease. There is certainly a protective effect from both coffee and tea on mood disorders, and certainly on certain types of dementia. And there appears to be a relationship between the health effects of these drinks and their antioxidants. And so really this is going to be a comparison of the types of antioxidants you find in tea and coffee, just to show that coffee is really just as healthy as tea. Now the first thing to say is that both tea and coffee can be processed in different ways, and I've done a number of videos on the way that green tea is processed into black tea. So tea leaves are picked. If they're steamed, that creates green tea, and the antioxidants that are found in the green tea are generally they're called catechins, but they're chemically flavin threols. So this is catechin, epicatechin, epigallocatechin. There's a number of catechins, and they're the main antioxidants in green tea. Some of those survive the processing into black tea, but black tea goes through an oxidation process. It's effectively the leaves are burnt, and this is why they become black. Now that oxidation is called fermentation, but it's not a true fermentation process. It actually is oxidation. And what happens is some of the catechins become products. They form other chemical products. Now interestingly, many of those chemical products are also antioxidants in their own right. So while the catechin content of green tea goes down when it's converted into black tea, other antioxidants appear in black tea. So then we have things like theaflavins, we have the thearubigens, and these are products of the catechins. So really, when you compare black tea with green tea, black tea has just as many antioxidants as green tea. It's just they're not the same antioxidants. Now you could argue that the antioxidants in green tea have different effects to the antioxidants in black tea, and I think there is evidence for that. So for example, green tea appears to show better weight loss effects, and it probably has a slightly higher overall antioxidant capacity because the antioxidant effects of the catechins are very high. There is also the effect that catechins may not just act as antioxidants, they may also act in gene regulation and other things, some of which won't even have been discovered, and this may explain why green tea is slightly healthier than black tea. That's not to say black tea is bad, but it may just be an artifact of the research that more research has been done on green tea. But there is, I think, slight bias in the research towards the health effects of green tea versus black tea. And you might expect that because green tea is less processed. You're almost making a decoction from the raw leaves of the Camellia sinensis plant, which is the tea plant. When you process things, generally you get chemical reactions, things change, and quite often you lose some of the health effects. So that's really a summary of the effects of tea. Now coffee is also processed in not a dissimilar way. The coffee bean, it can be eaten obviously as the original coffee bean, and that's called green coffee. The same way as green tea is the original leaf from the tea plant. the coffee plant produces beans, and those beans can actually be used to create a drink which would be called green coffee, and that's really its most unprocessed form. Now, the antioxidants in coffee that you would find in the original coffee bean are slightly different to those that you find in tea, but they are polyphenolic, the same, certainly some of them are polyphenolic, the same as the ones that you would find in tea. They're just different polyphenols. So, for example, we have chlorogenic acid. Now, chlorogenic acid is a polyphenol. It has a high antioxidant capacity. It has a different antioxidant capacity to the catechins. It has a different effect on human and animal physiology, but it's still a polyphenolic antioxidant, and therefore it has some of those similar properties in terms of disease prevention. In terms of other antioxidants in coffee, this really depends on how the coffee is processed, but there is another group of antioxidants that you can find in the raw bean, and those are called the diterpenoids, sorry. Now, the diterpenoids, the two that have been researched the most are cafestol and cawiol, and those two diterpenoids possibly have some health benefits. It's not really understood what they do, but they do have antioxidant effects, and it may be that some of the benefits of coffee come from these diterpenoids that are present in the coffee bean. They obviously have different solubility, so when you try and make a drink with them, they do go into the solution in a different amount that is in the bean. So if you eat the original bean, just as if you chewed the original tea leaf, you may actually get a different a profile of antioxidants than if you actually made a decoction and a drink from it. But coffee isn't really ever drunk. The original bean is not really used. What tends to happen is that coffee it is roasted. Now, roasting the beans causes changes to the chemistry within the coffee bean. It's an oxidation process very similar to that you'd find in the production of black tea. So some of the chemicals within the original bean are going to be changed, and in particular the chlorogenic acid, the levels of chlorogenic acid decrease, just as the catechin level decreases in green tea when you make black tea. When you roast coffee, the chlorogenic acid content of the original bean decreases. And what you actually produce is a compound called melanoidin. Now, melanoidin is a Maillard reaction product, which means it's a product of burning. When you burn food, you produce these things called Maillard reaction products, and they are a product of burning. Generally, these types of chemicals that are produced through burning, and roasting is an oxidation burning process, they're generally detrimental to the health. But it's interesting that melanoidin actually has very good antioxidant properties. So this is a chemical reaction that causes the change from chlorogenic acid to melanoidin, actually producing a different chemical but still retaining antioxidant capacity. So roasting coffee does not actually decrease too much the antioxidant capacity. What it does do is it changes the profile of the antioxidants within the bean. Now, that's very interesting, and it shows that roasted coffee, which you would use in, for example, filter coffee, still retains much of the antioxidant capacity that it had in the original bean. You've still got the diterpenoids, you've still got the cawiol and the cafestol, and some of the chlorogenic acid has been converted into melanoidin. So that's slightly different from the original bean, and that's how most people would drink coffee in its kind of least processed state. But you can also further process the coffee to solubilize it, and this is where we get instant coffee from. It's basically a roasted and then a solubilizing process, so that the roasted coffee can actually simply be put into water and stirred. Now, the coffee is not as nice as filtered coffee. It doesn't taste as nice, and it's not as rich. It doesn't taste quite doesn't have that the same coffee taste as filtered coffee. But what's interesting is that solubilized instant coffee retains a lot of the antioxidant capacity of the filter coffee. Now, I'm not a big fan of instant coffee and the processing of coffee. I think there's also more research to show that filter coffee has the beneficial health effects. There's much less research on instant coffee. The other thing about filter coffee is possibly you're more likely to drink it without milk or sugar. Instant coffee, from my personal experience, is more likely to be consumed with sugar and milk. So these factors have to be taken into account, and really the picture is quite blurred. It's not clear, and the research isn't clear on this. But what is clear is that the instant solubilized coffee does retain a lot of the antioxidant capacity from the filter coffee, from the original roasted coffee bean. And that means that instant coffee still has a high antioxidant potential, and this has been measured in studies, and therefore you're still consuming high amounts of antioxidants when you drink instant coffee. Now, like I say, it's very difficult to compare these drinks. There are very, very few studies that have compared the health effects of these drinks, and certainly over the long term it would be almost impossible to understand how these would fit into a picture of overall health. But if you are prepared to put some pieces of the puzzle together, I think you can say that coffee and tea are both healthy drinks, and really I don't think, although they have different amounts of antioxidants and different profiles of antioxidants, it'd be very difficult to say that one was better than the other. They may certainly have different effects. Certainly I wouldn't say that any of them are detrimental to the health. Now, one thing that's also interesting about tea and coffee is that they clearly contain methylxanthines, one of which is caffeine. Tea tends to have lower amounts of caffeine than coffee, and this is one of the reasons that coffee is sometimes perhaps seen as a bit more detrimental. The caffeine can cause reactions in certain people. But what's interesting is that caffeine is in itself an antioxidant, and caffeine has an antioxidant potential. It's absorbed in humans, and therefore it can act as an antioxidant in tissues. So one of the benefits that coffee has over tea is that it has high amounts of caffeine, which means that it has high amounts of in terms of caffeine, it has higher antioxidant capacity in that respect. So this just confuses the picture more, and really, I didn't want to come to any conclusions, because you can make up your own mind. Certain people don't like coffee, they don't like tea, so therefore you can't drink them. It's very difficult to actually make recommendations based on the studies that have been done. A take-home message from this would clearly be that I think both drinks contain high amounts of antioxidants. If I had to put my money on one of the drinks, or all of the different types of coffee and types of tea, to be the most healthy, I would always go with green tea, just simply because that seems to have the most evidence to support it as a healthy drink. Like I say, that might be an artifact of the bias within the research, in terms of the fact there may be more studies, or they're more likely to look at the effects of green tea over other drinks. But green tea does always seem to come out with these very unique health effects in certain respects. But having said that, there have been many studies that have looked at coffee drinkers and the association between coffee and disease, and certainly coffee is protective of many diseases. And I just wanted to reiterate at the end of this video that both coffee and tea have been shown to be protective of mood disorders. They do appear to be protective of degeneration of neurons in the brain. So that means not just protection against mood disorders, but also cognitive decline and dementias. And this may relate very likely to the high antioxidant capacity they have, because it appears to be that foods that contain antioxidants all have this characteristic. So whether you drink tea or coffee is up to you. Don't let people tell you that coffee is a poor substitute for tea. I think that tea and coffee both have a place in a healthy diet. If you have to make a decision on drinking them, always try and drink the least processed. So that would be green tea and or green coffee or roasted filter coffee. But it is interesting that instant solubilized coffee does appear to have quite high antioxidant capacity, and clearly that could be a good way of increasing your your intake of certain compounds, particularly chlorogenic acid, which is a polyphenol. The melanoidin is obviously going to be in there, and you're also going to get diterpenoids as well, which are present in other foods as well. It's just that the ones in coffee are are generally unique to coffee. Just as with tea, tea seems to have this unique antioxidant profile. Coffee seems to have this very unique profile as well, which makes both of the drinks, a little bit special, because you can't get those antioxidants in any of the foods. So I hope you found that interesting. As always, eat well, stay healthy, and protect yourself. And I will see you soon for another video. Take care.